Thank you.
Okay, that should have come up. Yes, recording for everybody.
Yes, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Great,
And then if you
great.
could send the recording, that'd be lovely.
Okay. And just croeso, welcome everybody to this workshop hosted by Tir Canol. I'm not going to do a formal introduction. I'm just going to do a couple of housekeeping things that everybody knows really anyway. As this is an interactive workshop, don't feel like you have to keep on mute for the whole session, although for the first kind of introduction, it would be great to remain on mute. If you can put your names in your on your screen, if you're Pete's computer and your name is Jane, then change it to Jane so that we know who we're talking to. These sessions are going to be recorded and they will be used as part of the documentation of the workshop, of the nature recovery workshops. If you have a comment to make and it's not appropriate to actually talk, speak towards the group, just pop your hand up and I'll try and keep track of who puts their hands up first. And if you can put your comments in the chat, and we'll be recording the chat as well. So any links or project information, anything like that, you can pop in the chat as well. Okay, right. I'm handing over to Tir Canol and Ben. Thanks.
Diolch, Liz. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Heledd.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, croeso pawb, pnawn dda. Thanks for coming. My name's Ben. I'm joined by Mick Green to help facilitate the session, and Heledd Hardy, who also works for Tir Canol, is present, and Jade as well, Jade Phillips, who does consultant work for Tir Canol. Yeah, thanks a lot for coming. This workshop, hopefully it'll just be quite an interactive discussion, to be honest. I know we've got a couple of folks from the West Wales Biological Information Centre here, and hopefully we'll be able to have a bit of a brainstorm about different sort of wildlife recording and citizen science initiatives, and maybe, what would be really useful to do in the area and potentially what could be included within Tir Canol's work. But I'll start just with a bit of an overview of the sort of rough plan for the session. We've got 2 hours. Feel free to join for as long as that as you can, and don't worry if you have to dip out. This is a rough timeline. The main points that I'm hoping to cover is sort of what initiatives and wildlife recording things there are locally, and hopefully pooling together quite a bit of different information from those present and from what we know, so that we can communicate that to local people, communities, and whoever might want to be involved. And then also understanding what barriers are to people locally getting involved or sending in their records or data, which is really important to know, from the context of, getting as much from the areas we can. Most of the session we're going to be speaking English, but very open. If anyone contributing wants to speak in Welsh, that's fine. We can accommodate that. Both Heledd, myself speak Welsh, so yeah, feel free to contribute in whatever language you feel free. So in terms of a bit of a brief introduction, this workshop's being run as part of a series of workshops that Liz is convening for the sort of Ceredigion Local Nature Partnership. And that's bringing together a sort of plan for nature recovery action plan for Ceredigion, and is part of the broader network of local nature partnerships across Wales. I don't know if you want to say something briefly about the sort of the other workshops that have been happening, Liz, and the experiences so far or anything.
Thanks. Diolch, Ben. Thank you. Yes. So as Ben said, we're running a series of engagement workshops across Ceredigion, the last one being in person at Penparky Hub on the 6th of December. We've had some really great sessions so far, a mixture of everybody from the general public to people who are really interested in what's going on in the wildlife in the gardens, to members of people who are on this call who've been actively participating, and there's been a wide range of views about nature recovery across Ceredigion. We will be writing up the results next week, and then that will be sent in draft format to Joe Wilkins, who's scribing the Nature Recovery Action Plan in draft form, I think, in early January. so whatever you say, and your thoughts about nature recovery will be contributing towards that plan. Yeah, that's probably me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Liz. Yeah, no, that's great, just as a broad context. And I know this workshop's a little bit different, but hoping that it'll be quite a useful contribution as well. Mick developed some of the ideas behind this as being something there is a real need for in the area in terms of understanding, you know, how different species distributions and trends are changing, and therefore prioritizing, you know, how we can go about nature recovery in this area. So that's, I guess, a bit of the backdrop to the session. And then in terms of a little bit about the actual Tîr Canol project before we begin, because I know that, you know, there's a few people that I know in the session, but also for those that don't know the project in any detail, yeah, we'll give a little bit of a few minutes on the sort of the backstory to Tîr Canol. Helen, would you be up for sharing your screen to just give your input on Tîr Canol? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. You're still on mute, Helen. Are you? There we go.
Okay, can you all hear me now?
Perfect.
Hi, yeah, so basically, thank you, Ben, diolch yn fawr iawn for leading this adfer natur yng Ngheredigion pwysigrwydd cofnodi bywyd gwyllt a sut I gymryd rhan today. So thank you for that. Yeah, basically a very general overview because I'm sure you all know about it. But if you want to know more, we do have a lovely website. It's called tircanol.cymru. And you can Google it and search for it. Basically, it's a community that's designing and providing positive outcomes for nature and people through our use of the land and sea. Basically, cymuned sy'n dylunio ac yn darparu canlyniadau positif I natur a phobl drwy ein defnydd o'r tir a'r môr. Basically, there are 4 main areas and elements and ethos to our work. People, a community engaged in land and sea management for nature and us, which is predominantly what we're doing here today. In addition to that, to celebrate our rich heritage and its sustainability. So a land, a community which is working at a landscape scale to support nature. The water, to have its clean and healthy waterways from rivers to the sea. And nature thrives as part of our community. And there it is in Welsh for those Welsh speakers amongst us. So basically, it's to creu, adfer a chynnal, to create, to restore and maintain. And if you want to get in touch with me, that's my website. And I'm going to now hand over to Ben. That was just my hello from Tîr Canol as a project manager. And now it's over to Ben to facilitate this workshop. And I'm here. And if anybody wants to ask any questions in Welsh or to chat more about Tîr Canol in general.
Fantastic. Diolch, Helen. Great. Yeah. And just in terms of the sort of geography of the project, it's quite, we're looking at, as Helen mentioned there, the sort of landscape scale, working at scale across the land and sea. So Mick is particularly, this is his remit in particular, the marine realm, and it always tends to get left out a little bit. But this is just an OS map of the area, and broadly, Tîr Canol's looking to work with landowners, communities, local groups, organisations, and you know, fishermen and people that are engaged with the use of the waters offshore in this area. Sort of, it's a very fuzzy line in terms of who and where we might work with, but broadly between the sort of Dyfi and the Rheidol River and east as far as Llanidloes, including the top of Pumlim Fawr, the sort of largest mountain that we have in mid Wales, and all these amazing sort of temperate rainforest communities of forests that lead down through the valleys into the estuaries. So obviously a complex array of habitats that we have in this area. And North Ceredigion is a chunk of this area. We're a little bit complex in that we've got elements of Meirionyddshire and Powys and Ceredigion that form this chunk. And for this particular workshop, obviously, because it's the Ceredigion Local Nature Partnership, we're sort of focusing on that, but it does also apply to the larger area as well. But that just contextualizes the sort of area that we're working with. So I guess some of the first points to contextualize the session, I know I think most of those that are here don't particularly need a big overview of why recording wildlife is important, but we'll start with this anyway. So I guess I know we've had state of nature reports just this year, actually a more recent one, but this is a quote from a previous state of nature report, which consolidates some of the sort of the data on the trends and the abundance and distribution of different species across the UK in different taxa, different groups. And it's a really great statement that I think, sort of summarizes quite concisely why it's so important, our ability to monitor and understand how wildlife populations change is really, even now in probably one of the most highly recorded parts of the globe in the UK, where most things have immense amounts of information about them, we're still hampered by a lack of knowledge about how even the basic sort of species ecology and how we can help ensure that they're able to exist longer term and how we can help them. So the understanding of wildlife populations and their changes over time is key to that. And obviously, probably more and more so in more recent years and more recent decades, the involvement of people, not just your sort of scientists, but those that are out and about every day, observing their local areas and what might be on their patch is a really important component to that. And yeah, this sort of so-called citizen science is something that is, there's various different projects and initiatives that have drawn on these sort of projects and can be a really powerful tool, not just sort of, the sort of recording of species day to day, but also the sort of more coordinated projects that have been focused on specific species, say. And I think something that Tyrd Canol is particularly keen to ensure is that we really value sort of local knowledge and wisdom in the area, of everyone that's sort of engaged with the land and the sea, whether that be, sort of farmers often, they've been working on the land for generations and have embedded wisdom of the land that they know in intricate knowledge, and so sort of really being able to value that sort of plays into this this whole realm of sort of citizen science and recording as well. It's just how do we best maybe harness isn't the right word, but how do we best ensure that can be contributed to something meaningful that really helps sort of ensure sort of flourishing ecosystems in the area. I'll pass over to Mick for some of the next bits.
Yeah, I think it's worth emphasising that we want records of common species just as much as rare ones. A large number of records of common species tells us an awful lot, and you don't need to be an expert to learn a few of these. We don't have a detailed index of numbers of common birds across much of Wales, just because there aren't enough people out counting it. We have a UK index run by the British Social Ornithology, and they have an English one, and some have a Scottish one, but we don't often have any detailed idea of the trends of common species in Wales. And it's really important to remember that common species can suddenly get rare without us noticing overnight. For example, the curlew, we've only recently realised that they're in dire straits now because we weren't recording them in enough detail. People just always say, oh, we always see curlew. But until we've got records down, we can't see that they're actually going downhill rapidly. So I think it's important to say, common species not to be sneered at.
Yeah, and I think a thing to really draw attention to around the whole wildlife recording thing as well is the sort of connection with your local area as well. Like for me, going out on a walk, making notes of the species and the things that you see every day, you're both learning about the ecosystem around you, and then you're also contributing that data towards really important initiatives. And by just paying attention and recording things, it does force you to really look at what's around you and then understand day to day and week to week the sort of changes and year to year the sort of changes in the wildlife around you and on your doorstep. So I think it's multifaceted really in terms of the importance. This little example from Mick in terms of what it can achieve and why it's important.
Yes, this example to go out to sea, because as Ben said earlier, the marine environment is often forgotten, and therefore marine wildlife is very under-recorded, but you don't actually have to go out to sea to record it. For example, parts of Cardigan Bay, as most people probably aware, are designated as a special area for conservation, a European protected site for bottlenose dolphins. The information, the evidence that this designation was based on mainly came from individuals from citizen science projects, although we didn't call them that in those days, but groups like Friends of Cardigan Bay, the Wildlife Trusts, South and West Wales, Newquay Wildlife Centre. People sat on headlands, looked out to sea, went out with fishermen in their boats. The fishermen were really good at sending their records in as well. So it was mainly individuals and small organisations that collected a lot of the data. It's quite expensive to actually get boats out to do surveys at sea, but we can do an awful lot from the land. And I think the more records we get of any type of wildlife, the more we can do to protect it. It gives us early warnings if there's anything wrong. For example, we know now from monitoring of the bottlenose dolphins that they've slightly declined in recent years, although they've been steady for about the last 10 years. In recent years, there's been slight lowering number of calves seen. So that's something we need to keep an eye on, but that's what everyone can help with. And we'll see later on there are projects. You can even do a shark survey by walking along the beach and picking up mermaid's purses that everyone knows they're the egg cases from the shark family. And there's a survey available, online information, that lets you identify the different species of mermaid's purse you're picking up, and that tells us something about the sharks offshore, and many of the small shark species like dogfish aren't doing very well in our seas. So that's just something, keep the marine wildlife in mind as well, because there's a lot we can do from shore.
Brilliant. So I guess one of the main elements of the workshop was hoping to have a bit of an interactive, bit of a discussion around as well, is just pooling together, I guess, some of the initiatives that are around that people can get involved with in terms of recording wildlife, both citizen science projects and just general wildlife recording itself. I've began with Mick's help and others sort of starting to pull together, I guess, a few lists of different schemes that people can get involved with. And we've got representatives from the West Wales Biodiversity Information Centre here that I'll pass on to you in a minute, more to do with the sort of general just recording what you see when you're out and about. But in terms of actual sort of more focused initiatives, we've pulled together a few here and tried to order them broadly in terms of, like, if you're just coming to it with, minimal experience and just want to get involved with something, maybe not too time intensive as well. And then a few of the initiatives that take a bit more experience to get involved with, that also sometimes come with a bit of training. And then the sort of more experienced, if you have a bit more knowledge in a particular taxa or, sort of more species specific as well. So just to run through a few of these, obviously a lot of people I'm sure know about the Big Garden Birdwatch, and that is a very broad and single day sort of annual event, weekend event, in sort of the early part of the year, and millions take part in that across the whole of the UK. And it's a very successful citizen science initiative that's run really well, but is quite limited in sort of, it being just a weekend a year. But there's things like Nature's Calendar, which is run by Coed Cadw or the Woodland Trust, which is a really brilliant sort of platform where you can note down your observations of timings of things during the year. So when you see your first flowers flowering in the early spring, or when you see seeds emerging, or when you see your first butterflies. And this platform really helps to record these events, the sort of phenology of species, and really is closely tied to the sort of impacts of climate change really on sort of ecosystems in the UK and how that's affecting the timings, because there's a lot of mismatches in terms of the emergence of different events and species, and that mismatching with other species that depend on them. So that's a really great one that people can get involved with and is relatively straightforward to use. As Mick was just mentioning, the Great Egg Case Hunt is a great one, and that's mostly run through a sort of an app really, but there's the website as well that's got loads of information, and that's focused on sharks and rays, looking at the egg cases that you find on the beach, and it's got some really good identification resources, and you can send in images and things like that as well to help. And things like the big pond dip, you know, depending on this sort of the interest area of people who are wanting to get involved with these things, there's lots of different tacks that are covered. I have mentioned here in the sort of the area with sort of some experience and the experience bit, ancient tree recording, because with Tyrd Canol at the moment, for instance, my time is actually paid for by the Woodland Trust, so it's Tyrd Canol's a partnership with lots of different organisations involved, and so there's quite a big emphasis on looking at the sort of woodland ecology and the health of woodlands and woodland creation around the area. And ancient tree recording is something that Jade, who's here, has done a little bit of in the area. I wondered if you could just mention a little bit about that, Jade, in terms of your experience with that.
Yeah, sure. So it's really accessible to do some ancient tree recording, and it's really important as well to ensure that these ancient and veteran trees are actually marked on a map. In this area, in like the Tyrd Canol area of Wales, there's actually, I think there's still loads of unrecorded ancient trees, because we have a lot of old bridleways and footpaths in the countryside that maybe aren't as well used as those further north or south in Wales. So there's plenty of opportunity to get out there and record these ancient trees. You do need a little bit of training. There are videos on the Woodland Trust website to help you in your recording, and also I'd be happy to go out with anybody and kind of give you a little bit of basic training on how to identify trees and how to actually record them into the ancient tree inventory. You can even on the website, it's quite cool, you can go on and see which trees have already been recorded and where they are in the local area. So there's quite a lot around Aberystwyth and Machynlleth, which is quite exciting. Yeah, I think that's it.
Don't know if you wanted to mention the Sea Watch or the Mammal Mapper then.
Yeah, the Sea Watch Foundation maps records of dolphins, whales and dolphins and porpoises. Again, if you go on their website, just search for Sea Watch. There's lots of materials there for forms for formal surveys, or an app for just casual sightings as you walk up and down the beach. Mammal Mapper is another app from the Mammal Society. If you see signs of hares or badgers or foxes or anything when you're out walking, you can just put a pin on the map. And again, it builds up our knowledge of especially things like hedgehogs, which are getting very scarce, and hares that aren't as common as they used to be. The more we know about them, the more we can sort of approach landowners to look at management for sites and things like that. Bird Track is the British Trust for Ornithology's app, and that allows you to just record any bird you see when you're out for a walk, or do a formal timed survey, and it stores all the records for you, so you can keep your own record of what you've been seeing.
Yeah, and I guess on the back of that, with the British Trust for Ornithology as well, the breeding bird survey scheme is a really amazing survey methodology that covers most of the UK and is based on a random selection of 1 kilometre squares across the whole of the UK, including Wales, and volunteers who sign up to be involved with the breeding bird survey are allocated or can choose a few squares that they're able to do. It does require enough experience to be able to identify some of the sort of commoner and some of the scarcer bird species, and I'd say from experience, woodlands are probably harder to do, because it's like 80% is based on bird song in those environments, which for some people can be a little bit more daunting. But I've also got experience with a few people locally have wanted to take part in the breeding bird survey, and over a couple of years have sort of done bits of breeding bird surveys with them, and then gradually they've built the confidence with recognizing bird song and different bird species to take on their own sort of breeding bird survey squares, and then do them sort of year on year. And it's a great scheme, and you just sort of contact the county recorder for birds and get allocated a square if you want to become, sort of get involved with that. And then there's other sort of dedicated monitoring schemes like the UK Butterfly, sort of transects and the bee walks, which I know places like Penparky have used that for monitoring their bumblebees on sites just south of Aberystwyth. It's a very simple sort of methodology to set up and just has a sort of more standardized way of understanding how things change over time, as opposed to just if you happen to be out recording a species, which is also valuable, but I guess a lot of these just provide a bit of a structure and more standardized methodologies for doing that within. I don't know if those present, if there's any particular omissions here, like Yusuf, I know I've got a couple of slides coming up where you can sort of talk a bit more about the work of WWBIC, but are there any particular sort of initiatives or schemes that aren't on these lists here that you maybe want to sort of draw attention to, or if anyone else has any input here?
Well, it's a good comprehensive list. I guess there's almost a dedicated monitoring thing for pretty much almost every different taxonomic group. You've got the dragonfly survey, big garden moth watch as well. But this is a really good selection there to get started, I'd say.
Brilliant, thank you. Gretchen, would you like to input there?
Yeah, there's the All Wales Rook count as well every year, which Naomi coordinates, I think, in Aberystwyth. So that's a good one, especially if you don't really know a great deal.
Brilliant, fantastic. And sorry to pick on you again, Jade, would you mind sharing a bit of your experience with if anyone here has never done or is interested in being involved with the National Plant Monitoring Scheme? This is somewhat similar to the sort of breeding bird survey scheme in terms of how you're allocated sites and take that on. There's a bit more involved. I wondered, Jade, if you'd be happy just to mention your sort of experience with that and what that takes.
Yeah, so National Plant Monitoring Scheme, or NPMS, it's similar to the breeding bird survey in that you get allocated or you can actually choose your own 1 kilometre grid square anywhere in the country, but I recommend somewhere close to where you live or somewhere where you visit often. And there's a lot of there's still quite a few squares available to choose in Wales, so these are mapped randomly through the NPMS. So if you go onto their website, I'll post a link in the chat after this, you can choose a square, and it requires going to that 1 kilometre square and doing 3 quadrat surveys and 2 transect surveys, and you have to do that twice a year at the start of summer and the end of summer. And the idea is to monitor how the plant communities are changing, both within the season, but also across many years. So I'm really fortunate that I monitor a square on Cadair Idris, which is one of my favourite mountains, which is pretty neat. And also it's good because it's montane acid grassland, so there's not actually that many species. So it's pretty easy in terms of number of species. There are different levels of survey that you can do. So if you're not super confident in plant ID, you can do a wildflower level survey, which I think certainly most ecologists should be able to do a wildflower survey. And NPMS provide really good resources for helping you do that in terms of a really good identification key book. And yeah, lots of other resources. So I really recommend signing up to NPMS if you're interested in plants and monitoring plants. It's a really good experience. I'll post a link in the chat now to the website.
Brilliant, thanks for that. Joe, did you have a point in there or input? Don't worry if not. Yeah.
No, sorry, I was just going to add that on, as well as the sort of Sea Watch, there's also the Wildlife Trust of South and West Witsu also do stuff from the harbour wall in New Quay, which I do some volunteering with, which is great, and slightly less regularly, which is a shame. They do the shore search stuff, which is actually looking more at rock pools and coastal ecosystems. And obviously, I think because of limitations on safety and stuff, that rock pools and those sort of coastal quite often get missed as well and overlooked. So not just, but yeah, I'm a big sea, ocean and coast lover, so I'm always here for fighting for the ocean. But yeah, just anything rock pools as well that we could look at too.
It's worth mentioning the Marine Wildlife Centre at New Quay if you're ever down that way. It's a great resource, and go and talk to the people there.
Brilliant. Fantastic. One of the things I've got noted down here, which is forming, well, is really growing actually in the last couple of years, is the sort of awareness of how desperate the sort of situation is with swifts across the whole of Wales. In particular, in the context of the UK, the declines in swifts in Wales are much greater than anywhere else in the UK, actually, about 72% since 1995. And there's quite a few, on the sort of counter to that, there's quite a few swift projects emerging across mid Wales and further afield, mainly focused on trying to raise awareness of the plight of swifts, doing a lot more recording of where swifts are already nesting, and then also then looking at where we can put up swift boxes to accommodate new nest sites. And for those that don't maybe know that much about swifts, they have quite a particular ecology that means they tend to nest in sort of quite high buildings, and have historically taken advantage of cracks and crevices in different buildings that have sort of just developed with sort of wear and tear on buildings. But in the last sort of 20 years, 30 years in particular, with new builds and with lots of renovations of older houses, a lot of those cracks and crevices are usually sort of sealed up, and nest sites that have been used for decades can often be just lost overnight, you know, if you have these sort of things happening. And amazingly, compared to bats, where as protected species, any building development that has to happen has to do quite extensive surveys to make sure that there's, you know, if there are bats there, you know, there's limits on what can be done, or if there are bats there, then you need to have some sort of mitigation. There's nothing of that kind for swifts, even though they're arguably probably rarer than some bat species now. So there's no legislation to sort of underpin some of the things that happen to these species. So initiatives that are taking a lot more notice of where swifts are nesting, trying to map this out, and putting up swift boxes are springing up. So we've got the Dovey Biosphere Swift project that broadly encompasses the sort of Dovey area and the Biosphere region. And then Naomi Davis is sort of beginning the sort of Aberystwyth Swift project, which is just starting, and hopefully is getting some funding through the local nature partnerships to be able to start up a group with that, with some equipment to put up swift boxes and build awareness next year with different sort of public events looking at where they're nesting and things. And one of the things I did want to just highlight in this session is also a bit of a discussion around how best to go about recording swifts, because a bit like Mick was saying before, in terms of you know, there's a lack of data on a lot of common species, and with swifts you need to know almost exactly which buildings they're already nesting in, so that if, for instance, something happens where unfortunately we're not in the national park, where there's a planning authority that a lot of any building sort of developments have to go through them first. But Yusuf, I wondered if you might be able to input on this, because I was at a Swift conference which lasted for hours, which was not very swift, last week, and this was in North Wales, and there's a lot of Swift groups in North Wales, and they submit all their records for swifts and their nesting sites through Cofnodi, where they've set up a dedicated page that has all the sort of key details in terms of very specific locational data on, like, the corner of a house where the swift nest is, notes sections, whether it's a sort of party of swifts flying by, whether it's a bird going into a nest site, whether it's hearing young in the nest, all these sort of details. Ben Stammers had sort of developed this sort of extra bolt-on that Cofnodi have incorporated into their recording database. And I wondered if WWBIC have got anything similar, or would consider something like that.
Yeah, we don't have something quite similar as to Cofnodi. Cofnodi have a totally bespoke system for entering records. Okay. So, and the advantages to them for that are, you know, they can do things like this Swift thing you talked about. Ours is our record entering system is based on iRecord, so a national system, and so the advantages of that are that it's more streamlined, I think, in getting everything in one place, and records can get verified by national experts quicker in many cases, because the national expert doesn't need to be local. You know, you can get like records of slugs, for example, just happen to be verified really quickly because there's a Scottish expert on the system, takes the photos, things like that. But it does mean that, you know, it's harder for us to set up bespoke things like the Swift record entry, but any info like that can all be put into the comments field. I mean, and you know, abundance, you know, there's fields where people are entering records for abundance, sex, young, all kinds of different things. So it's generally the same information, and any information can go in the comments, and then that will be coming up on planning searches and stuff.
Brilliant. And do you think, from your perspective, it would be worth, because there is a dedicated Swift Mapper app which was developed by the RSPB, but I'm a little bit cautious in as to whether that information would be incorporated to iRecord system, where local authorities would then come across that data, because I don't know what the what the sort of crossover is with that. I'd be tempted myself, if from what you've said, then maybe just to use Lurk or iRecord to record all the Swifts.
Yeah, it's like there's a I might touch on it later, but there's just a whole recording ecosystem. There's an app and a map and a platform for every different taxonomic group, every area of the country, and that can be a headache. I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. It's a result of, you know, lots of grassroots activity and lots of passionate people just setting something up, which is great. But there is a trade-off between the specificity, you know, of having mammal mapper, shark, egg hunt, etc., something specific for everything, and then getting it in one place. And there's lots of issues in duplication and that data flow and data gaps. So I think there's lots of options depending what you want to do. You know, me personally, I tend to wherever I can. If it's just an observation, I suppose the general rule, if it's just an observational record, if I've seen a Swift and I want to report it, a one-off occurrence, I'll always use either the local record center app or iRecord, basically the same thing.
Yeah.
The places where I would use something specific would be if it's a national scheme answering a specific question, like the National Plant Monitoring Scheme, Breeding Bird Survey, you know. Yeah.
Brilliant. No, that's really useful actually. And I think looking at some of these here, you've got a bit of a mix where you've got some of those sort of dedicated schemes answering a specific question. And for instance, one that I just picked up yesterday that's coming up, which only takes one actual survey, but is the winter gull survey through January. There's a call for people to contribute to that in Ceredigion. So if anyone loves gulls, which I do, just takes one survey visit for that. It's run by the British Trust for Ornithology. Naomi Davies again was calling for people to get involved with that.
Probably worth saying also with the BTO Bird Track app, the Welsh Ornithological Society is a partner in Bird Track, and we get the data from that. So that is reproduced in the annual Welsh Bird Report. So it is used within Wales as well as disappearing into the bowels of Thetford.
Yes. Thanks, mate. And just building on the conversation we were just having then, Youssef, in terms of just general recording and observation, you know, for people in the area and further afield, observations and queries of identification, you can record anything you see. And I guess the go-to for that is, you know, yourselves at the West Wales Biodiversity Information Centre. And I wondered if you'd be up for just giving a bit of an overview, maybe from your perspective on sort of wildlife recording in the area, some of the pitfalls like you were just saying, and some of the opportunities maybe.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the chance to speak, and thanks for hosting this thing. It's really nice. It's really good to see people, taking the initiative and to make an event about wildlife recording. That's great. And you've said a lot of the things I suppose I would have said at the start of something like this anyway. So that's good. So I think one of the key places where we fit in is just bringing everything into one place, and then we really operate as a kind of a key point of contact, the first point of contact in supplying biological or biodiversity records and data to local authorities, and we work with various partners in the region. And there's 4 record centres across Wales, and we all work together as a Wales consortium. And that allows us to be supplying data to national scale partners, Network Rail, all the trunk roads agencies. Basically, biodiversity decisions are being made all the time that require this biodiversity information. And the idea of the local record centres is that it's best for everyone if that's in one place, so people can get that information as quick as possible, and the information has the highest chance to be informing decisions that might impact biodiversity.
Brilliant.
So you're sharing screen. Possibly, maybe I could share my screen quickly and just
absolutely,
take us through what we could do.
Liz, are you happy to
I'll just make you host if you just bear with me for a second. Hang on.
Thanks, Liz. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Sorry, I'm chattering away to myself. I realise I put myself on mute. Hang on a second, Yusuf. We should be.
That's all right, don't worry.
There you go. There you are, your co-host as well, Yusuf.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so can you see my screen now? Just quickly going through, I guess, what we do is just talk through what someone might see on the website going for the first time. So, one thing the first thing that you can see is data of inquiries. So if there's any planning application happening, an ecological consultant is writing a report, they'll go and do a survey, but they'll also make use of our records. We have more than 4 million records for Ceredigion, Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire stored, and they'll do a data search for that local area and get all that in one place to be used to inform the decision. You can obviously use it as a platform to record your own sightings, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We work on various sorts of projects with the data ourselves, with our partners. There are things like, a few of them are here, like Welsh Landscapes for Rare Bumblebees, in partnership with the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, that's mapping the distribution of these bumblebees, but also using all of the records en masse to predict what kind of habitats they'll occur in, using that to guide future conservation work. That's a key, and that general principle of using all the records and correlating them with spatial environmental data is another key part of one of the things that happens to the records there. So these habitat association maps here, I won't go into any detail in this, but it's basically using habitat data and ADA records to show, in red here, we've got the areas which are particular hotspots of ADA habitat, and that they're phase 1 habitat types, which are highly correlated with ADA records based on the total recording effort. And this has been done for local nature partnership in North Wales. We've done it with various other partners, and it's basically just to support planning decisions in that, if an area is near red habitat for a particular species, it can be used as evidence to support and demand for further survey work to be done. We also host a thing called the land use planning tool, which the planning departments in all our 3 counties have access to, and it stores lots of layers in one place for them, and they can get various kinds of particular priority species records, like just put dormouse on and quickly show that in one place, or records of all Section 7 protected species, for example. That's just taking a while to load. Another thing they can do, we've got, for example, another thing that's made from the layers, there's this come on. Wow. It's traditionally the slowest. The only time I've really ever had trouble with this tool is hosting it now, but okay, maybe I'll check on that in a bit. Where was I? Yeah, these are basically more of the same. There's lots of different examples, and there's more beyond this in using the data to help guide conservation at that very local level is basically what we do. But the other thing that we are as a platform for recording ourselves. So there's 4 main different ways that you can submit your data. You can do it with the app on your phone, download the Lurk Wales app and just submit records on the go. You can download a spreadsheet and submit that as frequently as you want, or you could even send it by email, or even by post has happened before. So whichever way works for people. And I think there's lots of different ways here to record. The way that I find most effective is this WBIC online recording system, record.wbic.org.uk. And this is based on the same software as a thing called iRecord, which I talked about before. And that means that it links up with these national systems, and can enable records to get verified quickly. But you can see a kind of a snapshot of the recording that's going on in the area and the various things that people are recording. Of course, you can enter your own records, lists of different species. And this, one thing that's good about this, it allows you to view a map, and you can place the square down there, and it gets your grid reference nice and easily, automatically all in one go. The app will do that too. I just find this really useful myself, as a recorder, as a nature enthusiast, as one way of keeping track of just what I've seen. There's a map at the 1 kilometer square, and then you dig down further. You can see at many smaller scales, all the things that you've recorded, just in terms of, you were talking about connection to nature that you build up, your own personal recording journey. I find a very helpful way of doing that, and just of keeping track. I personally find it useful to put just everything into one system, because I'm a bit of I guess I'm just in groups, and so it allows me to then track the progress in all of those. So I can go here, for example. Hello, you still with me?
Yeah, lost you for a second, but you're still there. Yeah, brilliant.
Oh yeah, you're back in the room, Yusuf.
Oh.
Can you still hear us all right?
Yeah, I'm going to try, possibly might get 1 second. Sorry about this. Might get a better signal.
No worries.
Yeah, I think that's better now there.
That's great. Nice one.
Yeah, no, always what I'm trying to do. yeah, just, you know, I just filtered this species list. This is a list of all the species I've seen. Filtered it for slugs because, as it happens, I've got interested in recording slugs in the past 6 months, and under-recorded in an interesting group. And yeah, it just brings up a list like that, and I can do that for any different group, birds, whatever, records of all of them. And I can also do that, you know, on my records in general, you know, and just see all the different photos of everything that I've seen. Oh. Yeah. Lots of different ways to yeah, to play around with that. But it's timely. One more thing I'll mention. It's timely, yeah, having this meeting and talking about, you know, recording in the area, because we've just really started a project to yeah, to develop these kind of resources to engage recorders. So one of the things that we do is put on recording training. We do run public bio blitzes. We do recording days where we get experts or from the region onto an area of unrecorded private land. And we're frequently getting community groups, town and community councils, and people who've just, you know, maybe bought a bit of land and want to manage it for biodiversity, and they don't know where to start, and they're coming and asking, you know, how do we do this? What do we, yeah, how do we get a baseline? What should we monitor? So we're actually running this a bit of a project, which is also funded by Ceredigion Local Nature Partnership, and sounds like it will fit in very well with the theme you're developing here. It's in Ceredigion and Carmarthenshire to develop what we're calling a recording toolkit, and as a working title, just getting all the resources in one place so that people, yeah, can see what their objectives are and see what path might be best for them to follow in terms of monitoring their land. Running much more regular in-person training, getting the ID resources in one place, but also we're thinking about, you know, what objectives we can give people in terms of how often to record, which species to target, which habitats to target, and then what the records say in terms of the wider picture of an area, and, you know, what kind of final map or monitoring thing would a community be looking to get, you know, and or what kind of, or how can we track that personal recording journey to, you know, move people along. It's very early days. We've only just started this project, and it'll be running for the next 2 years, and particularly over the next summer we're going to be targeting different community groups to explore these different resources, and hopefully at the end come out with something ready to go that we can give to the communities we work with and training up with recording and identification. And yeah, and they can immediately see how they might fit in with the bigger picture more, and can hit the ground running in terms of their recording and monitoring journey. So yeah, it's a quick intro to some of the stuff we do, and finishing on this slide to show that, yeah, there's a lot of synergy, I see, with our aims and what you're talking about here. So very excited to work together in any way we can.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Yusuf. That's brilliant. And in terms of this recording toolkit, is that something, because often, certainly within my own remit with Tir Canol, you know, we often get contacted by smallholders or community groups and things, and sometimes as a project in the current stage anyway, we don't have that much capacity within, yeah, the staff that we currently have. Like, most of my time is more focused generally towards sort of farmers and landowners. And so if you get contacted by that, is that something that we can pass on as a means of sort of signposting to you guys, in terms of, because often it is about sort of like they want to know what's on their land or just a bit of advice on what to do and things. Is that something that, are you picking particular groups to test it out in the next couple of years and then roll it out wider, or are you open to receiving sort of requests from people in the next sort of year or two in the development stage of this?
Yeah, definitely open to receiving requests, because I think, even if we're trying to develop, I suppose, a more standard package to give to people over the next 2 years, but without that, we'd still be receiving requests anyway, and it all feeds in to that process. So yeah, be very happy to work with them. It all helps.
Brilliant. And just one more question on the sort of broader, from your perspective with the wildlife recording in Ceredigion, are there any particular gaps that you feel there are, or have identified in terms of what tends not to be recorded or is under recorded?
Yeah. Good question. I'd say, well, I think one of the things we want to try, I think it's to be key to do, we want to work on is developing, and I think it does require more discussion with people itself, more partnerships. It's a big question, like, what's the strategy, what's the goal, how are we assessing species, how are we using the records to assess distribution change, for example, and what level of recording do we need to do to achieve that? And because things are only ultimately under recorded relative to some particular level of recording that's necessary. But having said that, I guess Ceredigion in particular, has generally less records than the other counties, as you'd expect from the population density. So the upland regions are particularly under recorded. Invertebrate groups, across, which are under recorded generally, across the country. But I think I'd like to get some more specific answers, and if we can hopefully maybe email them out afterwards.
Absolutely, that's fine. Yeah,
require a bit of
brilliant
work.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks a lot for that input there. I'll just share my screen again here.
I would just say to that, I would just echo what Yusuf said about the uplands. They're definitely, that's why NPMS were targeting, well, in this case, they were targeting people who work in the mountains, to try and recruit them to become volunteers to do the surveys in the uplands. So in Ceredigion, we have a lot of the Cambrian mountains, and I'd say that's probably quite unrecorded, although I'm not sure how much is actually there anyway. But and I know you were doing some work on Plinlimmon, so I guess that's been recorded by Mick.
We're hoping, we're hoping to resurvey Plinlimmon. It's the whole of the SSI for birds next year. We've got some funding for that. And the Elan Valley Trust has been doing some work in the Elan Valley on the uplands there for the last couple of years. I've been working with them. But again, it's very patchy considering it's such a large area and the birds are in, things like golden plover are not doing very well. So yeah, any records from the uplands would be really useful. And the insects, again, from what Yusuf said, the insects are really badly under-recorded up there. We think that the lack of insects is one of the reasons that many of the birds are declining, but we have no historic data to compare things with. So that would be useful to get some now.
Yeah, for sure. Brilliant. And yeah, if there are any keen birders or experienced birders, I guess we will be looking for a number of people to get involved with surveying the whole of the uplands triple SI next year, which is quite a feat.
It's a big area.
It's a big area, and every 100 meters, isn't it, that has to be assessed. So just I guess a bit of a brief note on apps. We mentioned a bit before, both for identification, and maybe we could put more of an emphasis on that in this particular slide. With the actual recording, it is a bit of a minefield. I think that's probably one of the challenges actually with wildlife recording, is what you were mentioning earlier, Yusuf, just the fact that there are such a bewildering array of different platforms and recording initiatives to contribute to. Sometimes it can be hard to understand which one's best to do, and I think your line of trying to keep as much in one place as possible is a good one. I tend to use either iRecord myself or the LRC, sort of the local record centre for the specific county that I'm in. I do quite like that system. and it's tricky if you're traveling around, if you're in different counties in different places.
Yeah.
If you start using the local recording apps for each county, it gets a bit.
Well, I'd say that the Lurk Wales app is a all Wales thing, so it's not
brilliant.
specific to each county.
Oh,
So
that's
you
great.
can use that anywhere in Wales, and it will go to the record centre of that county. But it's just one app for all of Wales.
Oh, that's really useful. I didn't realize that actually. I've mainly been using iRecord. No, that's great. It might have come on a little bit since I last used it actually.
So yeah, it's generally it's always been that way as far as I'm aware.
Right.
But I would say, obviously, yeah, I'd recommend if you're in Wales and recording, I'd say the Lurk Wales app or submitting to the local record centre anyway would be the first port of call, unless there's a reason not to, like I'm submitting to some other key scheme, because it obviously will. And, wherever you put it as well, I think it will eventually end up in one place. That's part of the job of record centres, to gather that all the records, from various sources anyway. So Mammal Mapper, iRecord, Bird Track, those eventually will come in. It's just a slower process. So there might be more of a time lag between you observing the thing and then it being used in local decision making.
Yeah, I would also echo that, as that's a really good reason why it's important to upload your local observations, because they do get used in GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which a lot of researchers will certainly be using to map species richness, species distribution at a European and a global level. So anything that you record locally will eventually make its way there, which is even more important for how the wildlife in Wales is represented at a global scale. So yeah, just another reason why it's important to record locally.
Cool. I don't know if anyone here has got any other, the identification sort of thing, in terms of sort of resources and apps that help with that, is definitely, obviously, with the emergence of more and more sort of AI algorithms that are doing quite a good job. That is, it's definitely having a big impact. I know so many people in the last year that have been using apps like Merlin and BirdNet, which do bird song identification, and to maybe 80%, it is really accurate and does help people really connect and be able to start identifying things, as if having a sort of guide with them pointing out stuff, because I know a lot of people really struggle with birdsong, and they do generally do quite a good job. You do get some curveballs sort of thrown at them, that they, sort of yellow-legged gull or something that's sat on the roof in the middle of Machynlleth or something, but and I don't tend to use them myself, but apps like Seek and stuff like that are quite good. I use them with caution to a certain degree. I find that with plants they're quite useful, but obviously as soon as you stray into things like fungi and stuff, really they're of limited use because of the need to look at spores and much more detail, really. But they are certainly for people trying to embrace the absolute plethora of different sort of species and trying to pull apart sort of the species identifications. They can be quite a useful sort of verification or checking up, and taking pictures obviously is a really important way of, hopefully with certain species anyway, attaching them to a record that can then get verified by experts. That ultimately is very useful for a lot of different species. Yeah, brilliant. And I had a few people that couldn't make it today that did send in a few other just local projects and initiatives that they thought would be worth mentioning, both in terms of sort of county recorders for different species, but also specific projects that are going on. So Alison Hargrove from the Penllyn of Sadnai Sac, which is the special area of conservation that extends from the Llyn Peninsula all the way down to the waters off Aberystwyth. She is looking particularly for a help in recording otters across the sort of Dyfi and other water bodies nearby, and also taking water quality measurements. And she said that there is actually training available for some of these, and particularly with the water quality measurements. So that's something to sort of share around and make note of. The Pampakai Wildlife Group, that's coordinated by Chloe Griffiths, is a really, I guess, amazing example of where sort of the focus on recording wildlife on your local doorstep has really brought a whole sort of, just an amazing community and initiative around that down in Aberystwyth, where they've done some fantastic events and really just highlighted how amazing it is in terms of taking that sort of close note of nature in that particular area and using that as a portal to engage local people with what's there, and run some really great little citizen science projects there. It's really worth checking that out or getting involved if you're nearby. And then, we've just got a lot of these were sent over by Naomi Davis, who couldn't make it today. And I've put in a note there about the Ceredigion Swift projects that's beginning. And if you're further north in the Dyfi area, the Dyfi Biosphere Swift project, both for the sort of involvement helping to put up boxes, but also recording swifts when it comes to spring again. And then there's a couple of projects that I didn't know that were going on here. But a bit like Youssef said earlier, depending on the species you're interested in, there is probably likely to be some sort of recording initiative that's focused on trying to highlight that. But there are some quite specific ones here that I did not know about, like the Hare Street Butterfly Project. But this is hopefully, obviously this session's recorded, and I'll have a chat with Hella afterwards in terms of maybe having a place where we can collate some of these different projects and initiatives that are going on in the area so that people can access them, for instance, even just on the Tir Canol website, that signposts to some of these so people can get involved with them. I wanted to spend a bit of time just talking about, depending who's still here and if there's any input from those that want to contribute, just in terms of the sort of barriers, I guess, to getting records in or recording or getting involved with some of the different sort of initiatives that there are. I was hoping for it to be a bit of an open discussion, but just if anyone has any thoughts on this, whether they've had any experience in it. I mean, I know from the past, there's a few key things for me, often like time element. I just forget. Sometimes I've got stacks of records in my notebooks and I never actually end up getting to send them in, or in the past, sort of the sort of not being confident enough with like the identification or sending in records because I don't think they're like good or valuable or whatever. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on this, or whether you've had any feedback on this as well, Youssef, from the sort of your work as well, if there's things that we can address that would help more people get involved.
Maybe before we start, there's one. I'm just curious with the participants in the room. Maybe is there anyone here who is not employed or engaged in some kind of recording enterprise? You mean? I mean, no, just Liz. There's one, and anyone that might be a volunteer, could be considered a volunteer recorder. Yeah,
it's a good point now.
No, so
can I just say something from a
Sure.
a landowner's perspective, and also from a complete novice perspective, is that it's been really interesting listening to everything that's available. You know, there's a plethora of really great opportunity out there, but the fact that Youssef is developing a toolkit and that there are training sessions, you know, some of our development workers run bio-blitzes in the woodlands. The fact that there are people out there to guide you through it, that's what I really need. I need the confidence to follow someone around and be kind of guided about what I'm doing and how to use the app and what am I looking for. And I think I don't think I'm unique. I think I'm even in this environment, but it's really daunting. And especially when Ben Mullen, who used to be WWBIC, said everyone has different recording platforms, and I was just like, oh well, well, which one do I go for? And then there was like a crisis of, oh my God, there's so much to choose from. So I think the fact that there's a toolkit, Yusuf, and you're going to be trialing it with communities, that's a fantastic thing for me anyway, so that I could, you know, come along and understand what's going on. A bit like the Warren, you know, the North Wales Wildlife Trust's training on their new INS mapper, you know, having that available to people and to, you know, hand holding. We need a bit of hand holding, because I don't think it's people aren't not enthusiastic. They just don't know where to start. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz.
So that's probably something we could look at, and maybe on the website, put these list you had of the projects that are going on around here, but put you in touch. I mean, I do an awful lot of surveying. I'm quite happy to have someone tag along with me, and Ben's the same. But it's just making this available. It's not always easy, because I don't know when I'm going to go out. It depends on the weather and things, but there's quite a lot of people who do go out, and quite happy to have people tag along.
Yeah.
It's just a question of making people aware of who's around.
Definitely, and starting that conversation, yeah, and matching up. Yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, no, it's a good point in terms of yeah, looking at who's here at the moment. I don't think there's anyone that's sort of I guess you lay sort of public, just, you know, wanting to get involved with recording. I think most people here are involved with different projects or organizations, most part. So maybe, yeah, maybe a good sort of exercise of thinking might come to this next slide, actually, in terms of like maybe moving forward on the back of just it's been really, yeah, like really useful discussion, actually, both hearing from yourself, Yusuf, and just making connections and thinking about some of these things. It's fantastic to know stuff like the recording toolkit that's available now. And I guess moving into the future in the next few years, hopefully with, you know, the sort of tiered canal partnership developing, we have already, you know, different organizations involved, different community groups and things. And I guess just keeping communication channels with yourselves, what's going on, and maybe sort of having that sort of signposting page or something, you know, of how people can get involved with some of these different things that are going on locally, and, you know, also matching up with, you know, if people want to learn or gain sort of skills in particular, taxa and things, how to link up with things like that. Yeah.
Can I just respond quickly to some of those things? Is a really good point from Liz, and I think that's been echoed quite a bit in some of the people we've worked with, and some of the people have been trying to get into recording. They've also, I think, echoed what something that B or Bea, sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, has just put in the chat, that they put some records on iNaturalist, which is another app we haven't yet mentioned. But I think that, you know, that they like that others can look at the record and confirm it is really key. So that reward, that feedback is really important. I think that, you know, connecting to a community and also being able to know that you've progressed, you've identified something, and it's correct, and so you can see yourself progress in that way. And I think it's quite interesting, the difference between iNaturalist and iRecord. They're different systems for verification. iNaturalist was developed in America and is a global thing, and I think, and in the UK we've had the iRecord system, which works quite well for a long time. So a lot of people, when iNaturalist came out, they weren't sure of it to start with. It has a system where, so the iRecord system is that you just have, for each taxonomic group or each region, you've just got one verifier, like, or one or two, one expert, and they've been appointed as this person, and all the records flow through them. And that's a very good way of keeping a very tight quality control. So, you know, UK hoverflies, for example, this just happened to be a really well recorded group, and there's one person, Roger Morris, who just verifies everything for the whole UK, and he's amazing at the amount of voluntary work he puts in, and it keeps the data set very tight. But I think it is also obviously slowing down the process. iNaturalist is kind of the other extreme, where if any 3 people say that your record is correct, then it gets accepted as correct, and that's really good for building community, and it's obviously a lot faster. It has its own potential pitfalls though, because we don't know, no one really knows that those three people actually know that it's correct or not, you know, the people that verified it. So I think there's some scope for a middle ground there, and, you know, just giving people the basic level of confidence to help verify other people's records, perhaps. Yeah, and just a reward and motivation, I think is coming up a lot. I think with we often come up, people often ask, oh, but what should I record and when and how often? And if they already have the interest to do something like the breeding bird survey or the national plant monitoring scheme, that structure's there. But I think if you to go, like, thinking about your initial slide, Ben, you've got, you know, more,
yes, yeah,
no experience, a bit of experience, and more experience, some kind of motivation and reward in those lower levels, and some kind of loose structure is what we'd like to try to develop, you know, so to engage people in their area, you know. So for Liz, for example, there might not always be the resources to do an in-person training with, like, you know, every community on a very frequent basis. But if we can provide, you know, so one thing we're trying to now develop is a basics, more like photo guide to, like, we're starting with 100 most widespread plants that we've got from the records of all of Wales, and, you know, the key features to look for, and, you know, and perhaps if that's split to something that you can just work on it, you know, 10 by 10. So if someone that doesn't know any plants could then use it to go out and understand what's in their immediate local patch, and then maybe even say some, perhaps if it can say something a little about it, you know, like the kind of habitat indicators and stuff. Yeah, I think that's key too. Anyway, I'm rambling now, so I'll stop.
No, it's really useful. No, thanks for that. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has got any thoughts in terms of ways that we can involve more people, or things that we could consider within Tierra Canol moving forwards within this sort of broader topic. Certainly in terms of with the record centres, Youssef, I guess, just sort of, you know, staying in communication around these things. And if we end up having a, you know, for instance, a project that's focused on something quite specific within the area, you know, just having communication around how best to feed in records if we're doing something that's, you know, recording a species or something within that. I guess that is more about sort of communication with yourselves of how best to, you know, sort of get that over to you.
I would echo what B says in the comments, that more training events would be really good. So with Tierra Canol this year, we actually had a series of just free public guided walks, and that wasn't focused on recording species, although there was slightly more focus on trees at that point. But it was a really good way to kind of informally train up people in species ID, just because we had some really enthusiastic people who had great knowledge of mosses, for example, and birds. So we were able to do kind of like training each other, which worked really well. But I think it would be great to have more specific training events, if possible, run by volunteers or paid staff, whichever.
Yeah, I think there's a huge potential for that, because there's so many amazing and really experienced ecologists scattered around the whole of the area that often are either just a bit like you were saying, you know, either just going out and love doing it and are happy to have people on, or in a more organized way doing specific species focused work, you know, sort of sessions. And there's like a sort of younger ecologist sort of group that's emerging that sort of share sightings and things on WhatsApp, and a lot of the feedback on there is also around, you know, sort of the lots of different people in there would be really keen to join different sort of training around identification and things. And
in terms of what you were talking about earlier, Youssef, in kind of encouraging people to start and then move up almost like through the levels of recording, in the Woodland Trust for the ancient tree inventory, we have staff that can verify records, but also experienced volunteers. So it's almost like if you start off recording, and as you get more experience, then we'll notice that and kind of put you forward to also verify species. So that kind of might give people a bit of motivation to record things if they know that they can then become a verifier at some point.
Yeah, that sounds really good, really useful. I think that's something we'd like to work towards.
You got any?
No, I think it is. Yeah, the feedback to people is important. I think, keep reminding people why they're recording. They can pick up a copy of the Marsh Bird Report and see the records, how they've been used, and look at the LURC websites and see how the councils are using the records to inform planning decisions, and just keep telling people why it's important to send in and sort of sending some feedback. I think that's just to keep people on board, really.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Liz.
Sorry, I was just thinking about something that comes up in more general kind of workshops across the board. Actually, it comes up a lot within the community woodland world when we're talking about threat to habitat and planning decisions. But it's also come up in two of the most recent workshops as well. Is how recordings are basically essential to they're the kind of they're the holy grail of community fights against planning decisions. So, for example, there's a group at the moment called Save Kilby Hill, which is down in Swansea, which is the nearest accessible access to nature in the middle of a very deprived area of Swansea. And Swansea Council and Welsh Government are funding it's like a luge run down through the woodland, and the woodland isn't anything particularly. It's an ex-coal tip with a lot of conifer on it, but it to the local people it's very special, and the number of ecologists and recorders who've now come into the kind of group to help map the minutiae of nature in that area, and also upskill all the volunteers who are now involved, and also the local communities who are now involved. So it's kind of had a snowball effect, so that everyone now is going out and mapping and seeing what's on the hill. But that is because there is the community feel that there is real opportunity in recording, so that it will make a difference to the planning decision, and it would be good to see that backed up, if that makes sense. So if there is something really special on Kilby that's found, that the ecologists within the councils have the teeth within the council to prevent certain things from going ahead. Do you see what I mean? So people get really involved and everything's really great and they find these species and it's brilliant, but then the economics of a larger development outweigh the specialism of the species, and that happens quite a lot in woodlands. But I'm hoping that maybe the snowball effect in Kilby won't diminish their kind of enthusiasm for recording things. But it's, sorry, that's a very rambly way of saying it's actually really, really important to people. They don't necessarily know how to do it, but they know that if they find, a dormouse or a great crested, then they've got a chance of saving their woodland, which is, that's incredible to harness that enthusiasm and an opportunity, I suppose.
And I think that's really important. The more people with an interest out there are our eyes and ears to sort of warn the authorities as something untoward is happening, for hedges suddenly being ripped out or something like that. If they know a bit more about the background, then they're more likely to, raise a flag to it and inform people what's going on.
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind just briefly in this discussion as well is sort of species-rich grasslands, semi-natural, semi-improved sort of areas of grasslands, anthills, that sort of whole thing. A bit of a gap I feel in the sort of Dovey Valley area at the moment is the loss basically of species-rich grasslands, and what few ones exist. They might be there one day and then a few days later are ploughed up, and then might have a semi-improved field that's had fairly intact soil systems and anthills and things for centuries or decades, and it might just be sort of ploughed up the next day. And I know there's not really, I guess, a dedicated sort of recording scheme for a lot of those, but I don't know how is best to sort of record those sort of habitats in terms of submitting records per se, but I know that, for instance, if you have images and things of a semi-improved sort of pasture before that's happened, so you have like recorded it really well, then you can then, if you start to see things happening, you can take that to like Natural Resources Wales as a sort of damage to a feature. Whereas if you have no evidence or no records or images or anything of that sort of, you know, a field, and then it's ploughed up, you don't have anything to stand on. You can't even, you know, you can't go back on that at all. But yeah, no, thanks for the input there on that as well, Liz. We're running a little bit ahead of time actually, but I feel like I'd buffered a bit of time depending on how many people turned up and how much discussion and things there was. And I think it's been really useful actually, and it's been some really good discussions and some good takeaways to sort of think about. I don't know if anyone had any input or any things they'd like to say. Otherwise, I guess we could probably wrap up a bit earlier than anticipated if that suits people.
I think I just wanted to say that it was really helpful for me in terms of with the engagement on our site at Cofnodi Anyan. We want more people to like do these sort of things, but I wasn't sure like what was available or what I can sort of advise them, like, oh, go do this, and sort of engagement outside of our site as well, so that they're not just sort of doing, because we do the ancient woodland like tree inventory on our site, and we do that, so sort of things that they can take away as well and do themselves. That's been really useful for that. So thank you.
No, that's great to know, Laura. Thanks for that. Yeah, brilliant. And if there's any species specific surveys, you can, yeah, I guess there's a few contacts from here you could always get in touch with for those as well. No?
Yeah, I think the thing we're lacking with is amphibian records at the moment. We don't have many of those at all, so that's something that we're hoping to get more of.
Great.
Could I ask an admin question for those that are left on the call? Would you be, if you want the recording and you want to keep up to date with what's actually happening with regards to the nature recovery action plan that Joe, who was here earlier, is writing, if you just pop your emails in the chat, and then they don't go any further. I don't sell them to any great marketing scheme that's trying to sell you dog food or anything like that. Yeah, if you could pop them in the chat, and I'll just make sure that you get sent the updates, and also the copy of Ben's can't even think what it's called, Ben, presentation. Oh my goodness me. Yeah, if you want a copy of Ben's presentation as well with those helpful links to the online surveys and apps, that'd be great.
Thanks, Liz. And I'll try and add in a few. I'll make a couple of tweaks and add in a few things that were discussed from the session itself as well. Yeah, thanks for that, Liz. That's great. Could you remind me on the timescales for the bringing together of the nature recovery, and also like the...
Yeah. So Bethan and I, my colleague who's facilitating the sessions, we're meeting on Thursday this week with our so we've written up the first set of workshops. We're meeting Joe to go through what he wants to take forward from the workshops into the plan, and then I think Joe's going to have a draft plan by, I think it's the first week in January, and then the second draft is going out just before the end of February. So there should be actually something in the public domain before then, by then. But in the meantime, I can certainly share information and things with participants before Christmas. So you should get things in your inbox that will be useful in the next couple of weeks.
Brilliant. That's it. Thanks, Liz. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks a lot for coming along, everyone. And it's it's been really useful discussion, and has brought quite a few things to think about as well. It's been really good having your input as well, Youssef. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you.
Would you be able to send any information or details on the sort of recording toolkit over when it's, depending on how things are developing with that? It'd be brilliant to have a bit more information.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be, I'll send us some follow-ups to this conversation about perhaps something showing perhaps the recording gaps in Ceredigion.
Fantastic. Yeah, that'd be amazing. Brilliant. Well, unless anyone else has any input to give, I'll give everyone
just before you say goodbye, I'd just like to say thank you very much. I'd just like to say thank you very much for all the knowledge and the information and the sharing and collaborating. And yeah, so well done and thank you very much.
Diolch, Heledd. Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for helping to get these together as well, Liz. Looking forward to seeing how the rest of the process develops. And yeah, good to see you all. And
Yeah, good
now
to
that, yeah,
Now
take
glad,
care.
yeah.
See you soon.